Yes, Guyana to the world.
GlobeSpan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion with the pros, the cons, the ones that is taken aside, and the ones that stand in the middle. GlobeSpan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation's building.
She is a beauty, beautiful Guyana, with wonderful people all over this country.
GlobeSpan believes every Guyanese voice is part of the nation's building. As we span the globe for voices from the diaspora and those living home, we stand on our commitment that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana. As the world turns on its axis bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adapt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. GlobeSpan stands on its axis with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
With many flavor, 6 different people blended together. Raise your flag high in unity, we're family with one destiny. Raise your flag high.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us tonight for another edition of Globespan24x7, owned and operated by Mr. Nohar Singh, with our technical operator tonight, Mr. Devin Bissoon. Tonight we are discussing internal party elections in Guyana. Our discussants, our guests tonight are 3 very, very prominent individuals. One, a professor, and 2, one former federal worker for the U.S. Department of Environmental Protection, and a very, very prolific writer in Guyana who a former employee of Wall Street. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Let me introduce each one of them. Tonight is Mr. G.H.K. Lal, very, very proficient and prolific writer in the media in Guyana. Mr. Vincent Adams, who worked for the federal government and has also worked for the Guyana Environmental Protection Agency. And we have Professor Paul Tennessee of Washington, who teaches a variety of subjects: American security, global security, national security, global politics, international relations, as well as labor laws. Mr. Tennessee also was a founder of various labor organizations and was the founder of the DLM, Democratic Labor Movement in Guyana, now defunct political party. His most latest adventure is the founding of GO, Guyana Onward, as in the national anthem, may you ever go. Guyana upward, onward, may you ever go. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining us this evening. Viewers, thank you for joining us. We are once again discussing internal party elections in Guyana. Let me begin with the 2 esteemed gentlemen from Guyana. Mr. G.H.K. Lal, if you could just give us a little background of these internal elections that were held over the weekend and in the first week of June for the PPP and the PNCR and the AFC over the weekend just gone. Mr. Lal.
Thank you, Dr. Bisram. It's my pleasure to be here with you, Professor Tennessee and Dr. Adams. Let me be to our audience, who I think is primarily a US-based audience. I extend to you and your families a happy 4th of July tomorrow, a safe one. Internal politics, internal elections, party congresses. We've had 3 of them, one in early May, the People's Progressive Party, almost ancient history now, overwhelmed by the weekend developments involving the AFC and the People's National Congress reform. First, some numbers, and I'm looking primarily at the leadership. In May, President Ali got 77% of the votes cast for leadership. Vice President and General Secretary Barak Jagdeo got 75%. For AFC, Nigel Hughes got 70% after the run-up, where Sherrod Duncan was the front runner for the longest while. 70% was, in my mind, a fairly healthy and safe result. People's National Congress opposition leader Aubrey Norton got 97.5% of the votes cast, 1041 out of 1066. A staggering number indeed. Certainly impressive in terms of its implications, in terms of the mandate that has been given to him, and a testimony to the power that he should be able to wield given that sort of almost unanimous support. All three parties, the internal elections in my mind, have to be so clean as a whistle, pure as Portia or as California, that they are able to present a persuasive picture to the local electorate, the Guyanese electorate, that we do our in-house business clean. Our congresses are run in a very procedural and well and standardized manner, and the results speak for themselves. Because as we know, our national elections have been plagued by difficulties, which is a euphemism for fixing, rigging, and all manner of other accusations, many of them justified, if not most of them. So it therefore was imperative that all three parties, PPP, AFC, PNC, in no particular order, had internal elections that impressed us, that convinced us, whether you are in the diaspora or you're in Guyana, as I am currently, that yes, we have some people who run their own business clean, therefore the national business can be entrusted in their hands, particularly as we come to that decisive moment, which is about a year and change away, if not earlier, for our national elections. And we know what we had in 2020, really from 2018 December to March to August 2020. And we really, as a nation, as a society, don't want to go anywhere near to that setup. Now, I talked about 77 and 75% in the PPP's instance, and 70% in Mr. Hughes's instance, and 97.7, astounding indeed, for Aubrey Norton. Roysdale Ford spoke about, and Amanza Walton Desir, early contestants in the PNC elections, spoke about irregularities. Gentlemen and viewers and listeners, irregularities is a troubling word. It is a difficult word, because if that is what is mentioned by one or two or both of those contestants, then it is problematic. It raises all manner of questions about the authenticity of the elections. That aside, I understand there were 2,000 delegates approximately. Then there were 1,300 according to the returning officer. Then 1,066 actually voted, of which Mr. Norton got 1,041. Now, were they eligible? Were they not? Which was the real list, etc.? This, as I said, could be looked on two ways. He's got an impressive mandate that speaks to the delegate's intensity as to his fitness to lead the party into the national contest. And the resolution that came out really vested a lot of power. I would go so far as to say maximum power, with one word sticking in my head: solely, meaning that he has been given so much authority in terms of who is going to be the presidential candidate. I think it's most likely going to be him. I think it has ruled out a consensus candidate. In terms of Mr. Hughes' success, internal electoral success, that was, I've heard some things here, but we don't want to deal with anecdotes here. He's got 70% of the votes. But Sherrod Duncan was the man who was leading the charge. And then all kinds of things went on, some positive, some I'm indifferent to, but it ended up that Mr. Hughes emerged the victor. In the PPP setup, there's no doubt, especially when you look at the slate of candidates, that I'm surprised they got 77 and 75. President Ali and General Secretary Jagdeo got 75 and 75% of the votes cast, respectively, for their positions, given the rest of the crop, given the kind of super control that is exerted in traditional PPP congresses. Now, I want to take a step back, gentlemen, and viewers and listeners, and say this. Let us cast our minds, and this is particularly appropriate given our audience is mainly US-based. Let us look at US party conventions, Democratic and Republican, and you guys know this. There's a lot of horse trading. There's a lot of wheeling and dealing. There's a lot of arm twisting. There's a lot of negotiating behind the scenes, in hotel rooms, around the convention facilities, even on the floor itself. All of that, in my mind, is appropriate. However, somehow in our context here in Guyana, I cannot shake off the sense that there's a coercion factor at play, and there is that leadership power factor, component, element at work that says, because unlike the United States, whether you vote, whether you cast your ballot for this candidate, you're not going to lose your job. Your family is not going to lose their job. So, but here, there is that specter, that fear, that intimidation factor hanging over your head. So, and you are within the bastion of the party at this Congress, and therefore you may feel, especially if you come from a remote location or one of the outlying areas, you may feel that, look, you have got to go this way. We've heard all sorts of things about lists and preferred candidates and who was forced in a certain direction and so on and so forth. I think that may be a part and parcel of our politics in Guyana. That's part of our political culture. And I don't know how we're going to shake that. I think the intimidation and coercion aspects are what troubles me. So to wrap this up, I think each one of the three internal elections, the set of elections that they had, but I'm focusing particularly on the leadership races. They had their doubts, they had their post-election commentaries and suspicions and speculations. Interestingly, the PNC and to some extent AFC had their differences in the public domain, whereas the PPPs, I don't recall that there was any such thing coming out before or after. Nobody raised their hand and challenged. Nobody stood in the way. And so everybody lined up and fell into line. So there is something to that too that is a little worrying to me. But overall, the internal politics of our major parties do not resonate powerfully with me in terms of what we can expect coming in at the national level. Gentlemen?
Hello. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, we're hearing you.
Right. So thank you, GHK, for those numbers and figures. They're very, very important. Just for clarity, both Ambanza, Walton Desir, and Roysdale Ford withdrew from the contest against Aubrey Norton, pointing out
Mm-hmm.
the irregularities. So I just want that to be on the record as well. And
Yes.
questions, as you correctly stated, were raised about the internal congress of the PPP in the voting process as well. One of the troubling aspects of all of three elections is that delegates were selected to attend the two congresses and the conventions, and one is not certain about the democratic process that was used to select the delegates to attend these congresses or the convention. So I was wondering if uh, Vincent Adams, Dr. Adams, can give any further clarification if he is familiar with the process.
Well, of course, but first of all, let me say, let me welcome our listeners, all the wonderful listeners there, and wish all of our American brothers and sisters happy 4th of July tomorrow, all the barbecues that are going to be around the place. Make sure you go to the gym afterwards. Um, but it's nice being here again, Dr. Bisram and Paul and GHK. In terms of the processes, there is no reason for me to question the process. Of course, I guess I belong to the AFC party, and I would assume just like the AFC, the other processes are validated and approved through the regular processes of the various committees in charge of it. So I really have no reason to believe that there was anything undemocratic when it was when I would assume that in every one of the parties, just like in the AFC, that it was approved by some type of a process that has been in effect for however long there was.
Okay,
But sorry.
yeah, Amanza and Roysdale Ford had questioned the selection of the delegates, but I don't want to stick to that. Any further comments to that before we go to the professor?
Well, I don't think that, I think JHK Lal, you couldn't get a better play-by-play comment on on the election. The one thing that stands out to me, which has always been a concern in terms of national politics, was what appears to be the steadfast um, um, steadfast remain. Well, let me rephrase my words here before it's interpreted differently. But it's just the continued appearance of the divide along racial lines. The politics seems to be continues to, I would have expected in the year 2024 that we would have probably at least starting to move away from that, because I've always said, and I think most Guyanese believe, that regardless of how much oil wealth or other wealth we gain, Guyana will never realize its true potential and wealth if we remain divided. And we see it here again. The people have spoken, obviously, and this is what obviously they prefer. If you see the upper echelons of all three of the parties, the PPP-C party, the upper echelons of that party, the governance of that party is remains East Indian dominated, and the same thing of the other two parties, which is which is, to me anyway, I would have preferred to see something different, where we have more unity and diversity among the races in our politics as we move this country forward. We're not going to get any place if one race does not trust the other race, and then it's we see it through our politics, through our political system, that says, if the East Indian Party is in power through the PPPC, the Black Party will not trust the governance, and likewise, if the Black Party is in power, the East Indian populace will not be trusting the governance of that and of that party. And I think that's a major problem, especially now. This year is probably, to me anyways, the mother of all elections that we've ever seen in Guyana. And again, it's because of this newly found oil wealth that we've never had before, which should be, determining which direction this country goes in terms of policies coming from all different sides of the spectrum. So, it's left to be seen, when we go into our national politics. Hopefully the politics will be determined based on policies of each of the parties, and let the people again make their determination. So let the next phase play out in the coming months or within the year or so for our next election. So I think we all look forward to it, and hopefully we will have a governance, a good governance, to be determined by the people in a democratically run elections.
Professor Tennessee was very active in politics since the early 1950s. I don't think anyone has more experience in politics than him than us, and currently anyone in the political parties in Guyana. I think he's the last of the Mohicans. Professor Tennessee, you want to give us your perspective of the party's internal elections, and perhaps you want to relate them to your experience as the founder of the DLM in the 1980s.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for being on the program, and I'm very pleased and happy to be with Dr. Adams and GHK, because I read a lot of his articles, and I have a lot of regard for Mr. Adams as a Guyanese professional with tremendous knowledge on the oil industry. But first of all, I'd like to express on behalf of, without having been elected in a convention, the Guyanese abroad and Guyanese at home, our solidarity with the victims of the hurricane in St. Vincent, Grenada, and it's looking now towards Jamaica, and it passed through Tobago, it hit Trinidad and probably Dominican Republic. These are terrible times for people down in the Caribbean and Latin American area, because people are losing their homes. They are left with only the clothes on their backs, and this is horrible. So if in any way Guyanese abroad can express, manifest some form of solidarity through the Red Cross or whatever, and Caribbean people in the diaspora, it would be highly appreciated. Now, I'm going to raise more questions and answer, because both these gentlemen have been most recent in activities in Guyana politically and so forth. So we have had each of the four political parties which are in Parliament concluding their congresses, conventions, conference. We had the ANU, we had the PPP, we had the PNC, and we have the AFC. That's wonderful. I'm very happy to see that we are not in a situation of a political dictatorship where political parties cannot hold their conferences. So that's good, that's positive. Anyhow, 6 months we have to go for the end of the year. So I paid attention to the speeches of those who got elected, the principal leaders, and I didn't grasp what are their action plans from now in the context to December and beyond to 2025, when Guyana will hold presidential and regional elections. What are the, I didn't get a sense of what are the current burning hot issues regarding the elections process, particularly the work and responsibility surrounding the chair and elections commissions. Will we have history repeating itself? There is no election in Guyana. None. That we have not had, let's say from 64. We had some issues before, but 64 and onwards, always election, we have serious issues. Have we done enough over since political independence or since even 1992 when we were able to achieve free and fair, to have institutions in place that we don't have to be worried that we are going to go into another hocus pocus in the next election? People in the street are asking if internal party elections are not open, transparent, free and fair, how will these parties influence a transparent, free and fair elections now? Another issue regarding party conventions is that Guyanese expected stirring speeches and proclamations of their respective visions for Guyana and our people. Guyanese wanted to be able to distinguish the vision of one party from another. But lo and behold, I couldn't distinguish fish from fowl. As a matter of fact, I didn't hear anything about fish. I didn't even hear anything about fowl. There was no vision there. Guyanese also expected some clear indicator or qualitative signals as to what each of the 100 days, as I read in GHK, one of his columns talk about the 100 days, will be delivered for the transformation of Guyana. Everybody knows that Guyana is laying on a table and it's being operated on. The surgeons are the leaders of the political party. So what kind of transformation we're going to have? How we're going to bring Guyana to life? Because Guyana is a nation state too young to die. But our people are migrating. The young people feel hopeless. The rates of suicide and accidents and domestic violence and all these issues that we all are aware of are multiple. But I didn't hear anything from these leaders at these conventions. There was nothing that you could sit back and think about. So a relevant question can be, will there be a rupture with poor and corrupt government practices? No, I did for the Roraima Institute listening interviews in our 5 regions. And you know what people said? They would rather a president who is corrupt that can run the country than a government that's corrupt that can't run the country. And I did that during the AFCA PNU government. That's what Guyanese, is that what the options are in 2025? Will any of the political parties ensure that their government will educate, empower, and enthrone the poor and the powerless at the table of governance throughout the land? And I speak of local government. Look, my grandfather, William Victor Tennessee, was the overseer in Rosal on the Quarantine in the 1920s. I have 3 letters that a Guyanese historian sent me that he wrote in the 20s about drainage and irrigation and made recommendations of what should be done. If I show you those letters, it's exactly the same problems we have today with drainage and irrigation. And we talk about the hurricane and climate change and the vulnerability of the coast. Drainage and irrigation and the corkers are all blocked. And I didn't hear anything about this in the party conventions. I didn't hear about a sense of urgency. But will they ensure that on the tables of government, in local government, and I love local government. In the 60s, my grandfather became the chair of Ulverston, Alness, and Salter. And my father was the overseer of those villages. And they had put together a multi-ethnic group of village leaders, independent of the PNC and the PP, and they won. That was the first election I participated in, talking the campaign and went about with my grandfather. I grew up in that local government. Always go to the village office, learn the bylaws and all that. I believe in local government. I see when I was a student in Oxford, I saw how local government worked in Britain. I witnessed in my trips to Switzerland how it worked, in Belgium how it worked, in Holland how it worked. I tell you, local government, what kind of table of governance is at the local government? Do they have budgets, real budgets? Do they have decision-making powers to conceive and implement policies from below that will transform Guyanese society into a nationalist, democratic, anti-racist society? Where is the leadership that is training and empowering our people at the local government? We have so many young people in that country. They are the future. They are the hope. They are the only light at the end of this tunnel. But I didn't hear any speeches, any vision for them. Nothing. Did we hear of this recently concluded conference and conferences? Where are the competing visions and the new policies for the Guyana of today and the Guyana of tomorrow? One party leader was reported by the Demaraways asking that a law be passed for all Guyanese for them to get direct cash transfers from the oil revenues rather than cash grants that appear to be political handouts. Now, I had done a television program on Carbonation TV, which we do here in Washington, D.C. I had Floyd Haynes on the program, and he's one of the first persons I heard advocated that. And then Clive Thomas, a friend of mine from since the Ratoon Group, he advocated that. And then now I hear the newly elected leader of AFC say that. So I just would like to explain to Guyanese two models that exist in the United States so they could understand what those guys are talking about. I want to talk about the Alaska model. The Alaska Permanent Fund was established in 1976 through a constitutional amendment. It was designed to ensure that a portion of the oil revenues would benefit current and future generations. A portion of the state's oil revenues is deposited into a fund, which is then invested in various assets. So this is not just you're going to tell the government, take some of the oil money and hand it out, give everybody a check. That is not how it works. You have to have financial advisors that assist you to invest this money so that it could be continuous. Now, each year, a portion of the earnings from the fund's investment is distributed to every eligible Alaskan resident as a dividend. This annual payment is a direct form of wealth redistribution and has varied over the years, often ranging from $1,000 to $2,000 per person, though it can fluctuate based on the fund's performance in the market and legislative decisions. The PFD, that is the permanent fund, the permanent fund, ensures that all citizens benefit directly from the state's oil wealth, providing an additional source of income for individuals and families. Now, the Oklahoma model. The Oklahoma model is called taxation and state budget. Oklahoma benefits from oil and gas production primarily through severance taxes, property taxes for oil and gas properties, and other related taxes. These revenues contribute to the state's general fund. The revenues from oil and gas are used to fund various state programs and services, such as education, infrastructure, public safety, and health services. Rather than direct payments to residents, the wealth generated from oil and gas production in Oklahoma is redistributed through state-funded programs and services. This means the benefits are indirect and they improve public service and infrastructure rather than providing cash payments to individuals. So in summary, Alaska redistributes oil wealth directly to its residents through the Alaska Permanent Fund dividend, providing annual payments to citizens, and in Oklahoma uses oil and gas revenues to fund state programs and services, benefiting residents indirectly by improving public infrastructure and services without direct cash payments. I think that the government of Guyana is pursuing the Oklahoma model, and I'm not sure whether the leader of the AFC is very clear what he's talking about, because he just said he wants them to have cash payments. Now, my final comment is this. There's a lot work to be done from my experience. I participated as secretary of the Justice Party Youth Movement led by Balram Singh Rai and Jairam Singh in 1964 when I was a student at high school, Corking High School. And I have a man's voice. And I chaired a lot of public meetings from Mara to Krabu Creek, acquired a lot of experience. Later, I went to Georgetown, where my father was the manager of the Justice Party headquarters in Charlotte Street. And I continue as secretary of the youth movement, organizing nationally, and represented the youth movement on the Guyana Assembly Youth. And then later, I went to Guyana in the 80s, founded the Democratic Labour Movement, participated in the 5 elections and 92 elections. So I have a little bit of experience, apart from my missions around the world in Latin America, the Caribbean, and so forth here in America. Now, there's a lot of work to be done by now in December, towards the election. The list, we always had a problem on the list. Attorney at law, Joseph Eliezer, who was vice president of the DLM, Claudius London, who was secretary of Organize, myself, we burnt in 1989 the voters list in front of the Election Commission. Because 80,000 people names were not on it, and everybody born December, including Clive Thomas and myself, who are presidential candidates, our name was not on the list. So we burnt the list. Later, the PCD followed suit and did the same. We had a lot of problems with that list. Now, the other point I want to make, you win an election on the day of the election, not only by organized rallies, where you bus people and so forth, it's the day of election. An old politician in the Caribbean told me that once, and he's right. Because I went to vote in 1992, I lived in South Annandale, went to vote in North Annandale, and the polling agent of a particular political party was showing me to vote for his party. I'm a presidential candidate. But DLM had no polling agent there. PNC did not have any polling agent there. WPA did not have any polling agent there. You have to train polling agents and make sure they don't disappear lunchtime and all kinds of things happen with the ballot box. It becomes like Chicago. In Chicago, when you have internal union elections, suddenly the lights switch off. By the time the lights come on, the numbers change. So I want to emphasize, you have to have money, you have to invest in training, you have to start now. And young people are there, they could be employed, they could be trained, they could get political education, how you run a polling station and what it is, what you do. The other thing is, small parties are at a disadvantage. You know, we have the ANUG, we have the FC. I don't know if PNC is a large party or a small party because it has to do with whether you're well organized in the grassroots, it has to do whether you have money and so forth. The voters list had to get. The other thing with the PNC, they don't have the experience in these things because they rigged the damn elections over the years. They have experience in rigging elections. They could open a consultancy on that. They're internal elections and external elections. So they need help. They need some good consultants, you know, to help them to train polling agents. I don't even know if they're aware of that. The voters list has to be clean. And we have to be careful that on the voters list, we have a number of things happening. People are migrating. Now, I go to Guyana regularly, almost twice a year. I do a lot of listening interviews. I go back into the grassroots to hear what people are migrating. A lot of people are migrating. They don't see hope in Guyana. They're migrating. So are those people still on the list? A lot of people are dying from suicide. Are they still on the list? A lot of women and men are dying of domestic violence. Are they still on the list? Every day, 3, 4, 5, 6 people die on the road. Are they still on the list? Every day, houses are burning down. We just had a couple burned down in West Coast, Bobbies. Are they still on the list? People are dying. So we have all these problems and the violence in the country and so forth. So these are the issues that I wanted to raise. I like to be devil's advocate and to be provocative. So I'd like to hear a reaction from my colleague, Mr. Adams, and GHK to some of the issues I raised. Because you all are the experts.
So Professor Paul Tennessee went beyond internal elections to talk about problems and issues having to do with the general elections, and they are interrelated. So I was just wondering if we could just bring the discussion back to internal election before we talk about general elections, and essentially this, as Paul rightly asked, if you cannot have a free and fair internal election, how are you going to have a free and fair general election? So I was just wondering if you could address that, and also other issues you wish to bring in at this time.
I think that we don't have a liberal democratic country in Guyana. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that Guyana was saddled since the 1950s by Marxist-Leninist political parties. And when I was campaigning nationally and globally for free and fair elections for over 10 years and went all over the world campaigning for it, I could remember once I had a meeting, a lunch, with an official from the German Foreign Office. He had the Guyana flag, the German flag. And he said to me, he said, Paul, you are a young guy and you have a young movement, and all the other parties are Marxist-Leninists. Why are you struggling for free and fair elections to bring the communists to power? Which country in the world, a Marxist-Leninist party, has had an election, a free and fair election? So that is the culture we grew up. Bonham himself, and I know him since growing up, Bonham was an ethnic nationalist. Then Bonham moved, first he was anti-communist, then he moved to ethnic nationalism, and then he moved to Marxism-Leninism. When I went back in '82, there were 3 political parties which were Marxist-Leninists. WPA made a bit of a shift when they joined the Socialist International, but their program was revolutionary socialist based on a very abstract Marxist-Leninist conception of the future. And all over the world I went, people asked me that. Man, where in the name of God have you had a thing? So that's the culture we grew up in. And then we had the last election with the 5 months of a nightmare that we went through. So that was another story. So, there's a consistent theme and development in Guyanese political culture. So that's a big job that we have there. But what I am saying beyond that is that even leaders were elected by questionable elections. Almighty God, and they're supposed to declare to the nation a vision of where they'll take the country. Which one of you know what that vision is? Which one of you sat in your chair and said, yes, this guy or this woman looks like they have the answer to our country? That is what a party convention is, man. You have to fire the people up. You have to fire your people to go back to the villages and the cities and the towns and the street corners, to sell your program. But it were dead. They all were dead.
GHK?
I don't know what we'll do to inject some life into this.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. No, there are a couple. Could you repeat where you want me to pick up, please?
If you could, Paul was asking, if you cannot have a free and fair internal election, how on earth are you going to have a free and fair general election?
Well, I think I referenced that in my few moments when I said that the internal elections provide a blueprint, a model for the expectations at the national level. So if there are questions from now about that, about how you or I have run our party Congress, then it doesn't look too optimistic in terms of how things are going to be different come the big one, the big national elections. And let's make no bones about this, our political culture, our political history, as Professor Tennessee spoke so effusively about, and in which he has multiple more years intimate exposure than I have. Clearly, we've got to break away from that, and that's what I heard Dr. Adams said in his piece. We need to have a revolutionary change in our mindsets in this country, and it starts at the party level. We are talking about three major parties here, the People's PPP, the PNC, and the AFC. To Dr. Adams's point, you look at the slates, the leadership slates, and they are incomplete in some instances. The PPP one is done, is the committee members. And they do not inspire in terms of what should be in place for a multi-ethnic society, a polarized society, a resentful society, a simmering and raging society to some extent. Now, I look at the PPP 15-member, what's that called, EXCO?
Oh,
Yes, EXCO, and it's all people.
Committee.
Yeah, and I said, well, the central is the 35, I think.
yes.
Yeah, the subset. We were talking about the 15 here.
Yeah.
And the 15 are all people who look like me, with perhaps the extension of is it Gail Teixeira? Yeah. So here's this. And you look at the PNC and the four head people so far are of one kind of people. And the AFC slate, the winning slate, is of the same kind of people. What message does that send to the electorate? It is not a wholesome, it is not a healthy message when we are saying, we are openly acknowledging that we are a divided society, and rancidly and raucously so. Unless something starts there, not for the purposes of tokenism, but for profound belief that we have got to do something, and we've got to take the lead, and we've got to set the example of having the kind of society, the kind of party that reflects the demographics, not identically, but close enough, reasonably enough, no word closely enough, reasonably enough, so that there is that sense by people who are thinking of how they will vote, not reflexively voting, so that we can have elections that are democratic in nature, democratic in results, and democratic in what goes past the results. I heard the professor speak at length about, the governance models, etc. What is interesting for me is that none of the major political parties, gentlemen and viewers, are talking about what they will get from the major income stream, major income earner for this country by far. Everybody's telling you about, well, at least the opposition parties are telling you, well, we want to do this and we want to do that. And that's wonderful. The spending, poverty amelioration, and cost of living ease, relief, and money to youth, and so on and so forth. Beautiful things. I will admit publicly those are beautiful things. However, having said that, we are talking about the spending side only. Where is the revenue side? Where is the income, the money coming in to make possible those? One party said we're going to talk about that in the first 100 days. Another one said, well, I am not going to do anything about my relationship with the oil companies at this point, if and until such happens. I think that is his right to do so. But unfortunately, from my perspective, and I think the perspective of many Guyanese who are really, really feeling that they are not the richest people in the world, and more likely are feeling that they are closer to the poorest people in the world, given their individual circumstances and their community circumstances and their family circumstances, that something has got to give here, and that is what has to come out of these party congresses. And I don't think that they came out sharp enough, strong enough, and sufficiently enough to persuade even the rank and file, the ordinary citizen who don't write letters, who don't sit on a column or on a show like this, but they too are using their reasoning and their common sense and say, why is this so? Why should this be so? Why is there this? This dread, this reluctance to say, well, we are going to deal with the oil head on and front on. And because that's where the source of the money is going to come from to make all these things possible, should we win in a national election, and we are appealing to you now, this is our program, these are the outlines of our program, this is our plank, this is how we're going to be, and this is what it is going to mean for you. The internal politics, getting past the controversies about irregularities and preferred lists and who switched where and what, and perhaps the intimidation factor. What is it, as we go now into the national forum, what is it that separates me? And I think I heard the professor say that. What is it that separates me from the competition? What is it? One party dropped isms, and I think maybe they are for capitalism, which is a good thing. I like that, but clean one, not crony one. And the other one says, well, we're going to do this later. Yes, everything is going to be later, but we need to know, we need to have a sketch now as to where you stand so we can hold you to that. As leaders coming out of a Congress, successfully emerging victorious from a Congress, it has to be said, I've got to fire up the people and tell them, say, hey, listen, now that I've been given this mandate, this is my top priority. Give us one priority that I'm going to make my drop dead issue to have a better Guyana. I have not heard that. I have heard I've seen shying away. I've read about kind of leaning backwards. And I'm still to hear that the winners say, well, we're going to take this thing head on and we're going to get someplace for the Guyanese people.
Dr. Bishram, can I follow up on what GHK has just said?
I do that, and then we'll go to Dr. Adams. Go ahead.
Okay, I can?
Yes, please.
Okay, first of all, I endorse what the line that GHK has just taken. It's correct. But let's focus a bit on the oil industry. I consider myself extremely knowledgeable about Venezuela. I spent 2 years researching the oil industry in Venezuela, and I wrote a book, and it's published, was recommended to be published by the Central University. And the other thing is, I wrote extensively at York University on the nationalization of the oil industry in Venezuela. Then in 2012, I went to Dubai and I did a workshop on gas and oil for Nigerian officials from the National Oil Company. Don't ask me why I got invited to make a presentation in Dubai. Probably they went there to do shopping, but that's another matter. But I put my students, I had a course in ethics, and I put my students to answer one question over various semesters. How have the citizens of oil country X benefited from the oil revenues? And they looked at almost all of them: Angola, Norway, Nigeria, Venezuela, Brazil, Colombia, all of them. My friends, I have the students' paper and it's footnoted. The minimum wage of most of those countries for the poor people is less than $1 and $2 a day. And the corruption, and I teach government and political corruption, and the corruption is extraordinary in Angola. And imagine Angola, as a student, we used to be all over the campuses in Europe and Latin America, North America. La luta continua. Mozambique and Angola, the liberation. And the daughter of the president of Angola owns a bank in Portugal. She's now before the court. The one in Equatorial Guinea, he owns all the expensive apartments in Paris, and he owns all kinds of things. And they're using the oil revenues. So And Venezuela, we're next to Venezuela. We see what's happening there. So the question is this. Where is the message from these various political leaders? And I follow up on what GHK is saying. What is the message that Guyana would be different? That Guyana would be different. That is what they have to say. They have to stand up and say at that convention, look, we just got oil. We have moved from Boca Guyana to Exxon Guyana. This is where the difference is going to be. We look at countries all over the world, and we notice that the rich gets richer. Most of the money goes abroad in bank accounts, whether it's Dubai or whether it's in Delhi or now it's in Beijing or Hong Kong or wherever, in Turkey or wherever they're banking their money now, where they could have access to it. And the poor people did not know. So we are going to make a difference. I want to see them hit their stomach and say, I am going to make a difference, because as president, I will ensure that anybody who uses public office for private gain will go to jail for a long, long time. And I would like to have heard that both the Ministry of Home Affairs and the Attorney General Office are going to be committed to set up a governmental agency, autonomous and independent, to look at corruption using public office for private gain. Look, I go throughout Guyana, and all the people of Guyana say that the public officers of Guyana, the people who are in public offices, that in this government, the previous government, and the government before that government, since political independence, are corrupt. It's perception. And I think GHK is making a very important. Perception is very important. You know, it's good you could say, well, where is the evidence? But by God, if your people believe that you're not honest, let me give you an example, and I'm going to stop there. It has to do with educating our people from kindergarten. My grandfather, my house was near to my grandfather when he was chairman of Alderson also. And I was passing by his house, and he looked through the window, and he was trained by the British. So he had an authoritarian way. He said, Paul. I said, yes, grandfather. He said, come here. So I went up and said, yes, grandfather. He said, I want you to post a letter for me. And I took the letter. About 2 days afterwards, I'm passing by his house. He looked through the window. Paul, yes, grandfather, come here. And I went up to see my grandfather. He said, did you post the letter? I said, of course, grandfather, I posted the letter. I was offended. He said, how do I know? I said, I give you my word. And that was good enough for him. How can we get back to that kind of education? That's where it has to begin. This is not a job only for those in power and those aspiring to power. This is a job where the political parties have got to begin to educate the people. You have to do it in the party bottom house meetings, in your conferences and so forth. It's not only the job of one or two leaders. It's a national job. The faith-based organizations, the NGOs, they got to get involved in that. So this is, I don't want to go on preaching to the choir, but that is my perspective on this.
Very, very powerful. You have my word. It must have meaning to it. The right person to answer the questions you asked earlier about the oil and gas is here with us, Dr. Vincent Adams. Can you answer his question about what do we do, oil and gas money?
Well, there are actually a couple of questions there, and the first thing is I don't want to dwell on questions concerning the internal elections of these parties. Again,
we are done with that. We are done with that. We have
I just wanted to repeat though that I have no evidence. I think we can. I wouldn't get into making accusation. We have no really, there's always accusations. Accusations will come in every election.
I agree.
The second thing is, I think Paul mentioned the no, sorry, JHK also, he agreed with me in terms of, the makeup, the ethnicity of these parties. They've stuck to the traditional way of where the votes are aligned along racial lines. So I'm looking forward, and I'm hoping that these parties, when they go out there with in the national elections, there will be effort. There will be effort, because I know that, I know most of the gentlemen in all of the parties. Hopefully there will be effort to attract folks from the other ethnic groups that are not currently aligned with their parties. I think that's going to go a long way fundamentally in uniting this country, which is so critical if we're going to move forward and realize our wealth. The other thing to address Dr. Tennessee statement, I for one, I was really not looking out for policies during the internal elections. I think hopefully that's going to start coming out after the internal elections are completed, and each party is now starting to put together their policies and plan as they go there in the campaign to show the differences between the various parties to attract people to vote for them. And hopefully it will not just be their plans that they're coming out with. It's not just going to be biased towards their constituency, but it would be for the entire nation. As far as where the oil money is going, which is a critical question, and which has been one of the disappointments for me. First of all, oil will only be in Guyana for, 20, 30 years. Each of these developments, they've got it slated to last about 20 years. So we're looking total maybe about 20, 30 years. So our main focus when we do strategic planning, and that's something that is foreign to Guyana, unfortunately. I remember when I worked for the U.S. government, we had to do a 3-year, a 5-year, 10-year, or even sometimes a 15-year strategic plan. So every year you submit your budget. When you submit your budget to the White House, it had to be aligned with those plans. And if you go outside of those plans, if things change, you gotta say why. But the one thing that we must do is to have these strategic planning. Oil is only going to be here 20 to 30 years. And what we ought to be doing is taking advantage or utilizing the income from that oil, and investing it in terms of how is the country going to be sustainable after oil is gone. Half of Guyana's population, folks, is below the age of 27. 60% of Guyana's population is below the age of 40. So 20, 30 years from now, this nation will be in its prime. So we've got to start planning ahead. Now, we've studied it as, when I was in my position there in the U.S. government, we had to go and to keep America competitive. We had to study when we put our budgets and our planning together to determine how do we keep America competitive, which meant we looked at every single country. And the one thing that we determined after the world economic crisis in 2008, when before that, if you read any textbook, it's going to say infrastructure, you build it and they're going to come. Well, we found in 2008, that was one of the biggest fallacies. That paradigm has shifted. It's now education is the #1 driver for foreign direct investment. It is education. So one of the big mistakes that is right in hitting us between the eyes. Look at how we're treating our teachers. They're on strike. Education to attract foreign investment, and you ask the excellence of the world, that's exactly what they're going to say. Number 2 is not even infrastructure. Number 2 is to follow the rule of law. And we know some of the issues that we're struggling with in Guyana in terms of following the rule of law from the top right down. And then infrastructure comes first. Right now, infrastructure is way ahead of everything else in Guyana. We're spending right now about 60%, exactly 58% in this year's budget. 58% of our budget is going into infrastructure. while teachers, for example, which is supposed to be the number one, being part of the education to build this country and to make it sustainable, they are living on minimum wage. That's average salary. Average salary of a teacher is 180 thousand Guyana dollars, which is 800 Guyana dollars. It is the lowest in the Caribbean. Countries such as Grenada and those countries that do not produce a barrel of oil, Grenada produce nutmeg, for example. Their salaries are 2 and 3 times what our folks are getting. So we've got to start changing our priorities. So when we look in terms of the campaign and the policies and the message that we're all talking about here tonight, those are the kinds of things that we expect our leaders, even if they're not aware of these things, at least they go and be informed. Be informed as to what's going on in the rest of the world and what is the order of the day in terms of the new paradigm to make us competitive, rather than putting all of our money in infrastructure. And even I think that it was the president himself when he was in opposition, president or vice president said, we can't eat roads, which is the same thing we've come to. $666 billion of our 1 point something trillion, $666 billion is going into infrastructure. That is craziness, and it has to change. I hear the vice president, for example, saying that the only thing that opposition, and this is not political, these are statements that have to be watched very carefully, regardless of which political party you belong to. The vice president lambasted the opposition when they were putting the budget together several times, saying that the only thing that they're talking about is feeding the people with the money. Well, what could be more basic than making sure that your people have food and shelter and a good education? Those are the basic things of our society, but we've got it all twisted around. So what I'm looking forward to, it's obviously, besides a free and fair election, which I hope that we're going to get, because hopefully our politicians are going to put pressure on GCOM and whoever is in charge of the election to make sure we have basic things such as biometrics and the clean voters list. And these are not anything foreign to either of these two parties. When the opposition the government was in opposition, they were clamoring for biometrics and a clean voters list. So now we've got something in common in terms of an interest to have a free and fair election. So I expect that they all are going to understand that it's the right thing to do for the country, and we will have that. And I look forward to a good and healthy debate where people could understand what is going on and vote for their best interest rather than voting along racial lines.
Okay, so if you could get back to GHK, a lot has been said about conflict of interest in the newspapers. I believe you yourself raised it in one of your columns. You want to talk a little about that? I guess they were referring to the AFC leadership.
Yeah, but before we go, thank you, Dr. Bishram. Before we go there, I'd like to say a couple of quick things here about oil and money, and then we'll go to that perception and reality of conflict of interest. One, I hear you, Dr. Adams, that from an internal party elections, Congress, you may not get concrete policy statements. But I think at least each party needs to come out with a statement of intent about at least one thing. And what is the major thing in Guyana? Might be clean governance, but we're talking money here, so it's got to be oil. In terms of the oil, there are three things I want to pinpoint quickly. One, the G20 countries, under the prompting of the United States government, mentioned that there should be a 15% minimum tax regime introduced. 15% minimum tax regime introduced for our oil in our oil wells, so that that is a source of revenue for us. Instead, we have gone the other way with a 25% tax certificate to Exxon, which is present in the United States. That's one. The second thing, oil projects. We don't have to renegotiate any contract. I'm talking about the income side now, the revenue side, to make all these great plans that I support from all three parties about post-2025 elections. You have got to look at each new project and say, what can I get out of this that is better than all that have went before? What can I get out of each one? We are not renegotiating any contract, but we're saying, well, we want this thing and this thing and this thing here. And I have not heard of that. Exxon is so deep into Guyana. I'm going to say something I said on the David Hines program recently. Wall Street lives on earnings per share. I've come from that world. Every quarter. So Exxon has to keep that machine going, that cash register humming. And where does it happen? From the Permian Basin, indeed. But also, it is predicated on what happens here. And so new oil projects feed that beast. That's our opportunity to say, yeah, you want this, and we want this too. So we've got a 7th oil project coming up. I think we missed a boat with that, with the 6th one and the 5th one. No. So therefore, we should learn. And since Exxon is playing hardball with us with our audits and so on and so forth, and our auditors checking meters, going to the pump stations to see what is really going on there, I think the government of Guyana has to do something that brings something positive to us. The last thing on oil before I go to conflict of interest is this. The IEA, and Dr. Adams, this is your territory, the International Energy Agency said that as predicted, that by 2029, oil demand for oil is going to start to fall. And by 2030, you can have as much as 8 million barrels surplus per day. Now, it is imperative, therefore, that we get our maximization of oil money now, not later. Not later, because we could be going in a situation where everybody's got oil on their hands and they're trying to dump it into, there's oversupply. So prices go down and we will not be getting as much money as we had anticipated, although our volume would be higher. That aside, I'm done with oil. Conflict of interest. Nigel Hughes, let's call it. He's a brother of mine. I consider him a friend. And it hurts me to say there's no joy here to say you've been elected leader. You've come out of the political wilderness, self-imposed, after I think 7-8 years. And it's a welcome addition to the political fold. I make that clear. I put that on the public table. However, I must say that I'm disappointed. I am disappointed to hear that there is no law that prevents me from representing Exxon. I agree that there is no law, but there's a higher law. There are unwritten laws. There are moral laws. There are these kinds of laws that are inscribed in our hearts that brings out the best of the nationalistic and the patriotic in us and say, what is it that my people, the people that I'm looking to lead, what is it they lack and what is it they need and what is it that they must get? So you're going to tell me now at this point that if and when I become president, then I will make a decision and possibly set up a committee, etc., etc. Listen, my standing is clear cut. It is adamant about this. You are running for the highest national office at the biggest time in the life of Guyana. You've got to make a decision now. You've got to let go of that thing. You have got an opportunity, Mr. Hughes, my brother, to make a statement to all of Guyana that this is what differentiates me from the PNC, from the PPP, in that I am projecting, standing for that distinction that is actually different, because I am making the sacrifice, a multi-million US dollar possible sacrifice, by relinquishing this oil, this legal contract, this legal representation relationship that I have with ExxonMobil right now. That's where I stand. I see a conflict of interest, not per se, but in terms of the appearance of the thing. It's not just the thing, it's the appearance of the thing. And it is interconnected, it's intricately linked to Mr. Hughes's raising his hand and stepping forward to say, I want to represent you. I am going to stand for you. Well, if you're going to stand for me now, you're going to have to cut those ties right now.
Let me address a couple of things that I think is very, very important.
Okay,
and I really want to disagree with my good friend GHK here in terms of renegotiation. We cannot rely anymore upon approval of these projects for renegotiation. That boat has already gone down that falls. Right now, we're producing with 3 projects, 650 million barrels, 600,000 barrels per day. With the 7th project, this 7th project might take us to 1.5 million barrels per day. The Stabroek block is already sold. So if you do not negotiate the contract, that means, you know, what you're going to do in the future. There's no life left in the rest of the projects that are coming on stream. So those, it's the Stabroek block is already gone. You've got to go back, and that's the trick. And I've got to say that's the trick that this government played with this new type of contract that they developed. They distracted from the Stabroek block exploration and development, which has most of the oil. So all these new contracts that are going to be coming on stream and projects, who knows how much oil they have? We know what the Stabroek block has. So we're through the 7th block, the 7th project already. So if we do not renegotiate those contracts to get a better deal, we've already lost almost, the majority of what we should be gaining. The other thing is, GHK talked about the taxes. And I don't think a whole lot of people realize what goes on with the taxes. We pay the taxes, basically, we pay it to ourselves. It goes from one agency to the next. But nevertheless, Exxon, we gave them a certificate for the taxes that are paid. So they do not pay a dime in taxes. We pay the taxes from the Treasury to GRA. It goes into, we gave them a certificate. They take that certificate to the IRS in the United States government and gets a credit for it. There's lots of question as to whether that's legal or not. But that contract has to be renegotiated. Like I don't think the people understand the power of no ring fencing. The damage that has done to us in terms of not getting, because we're investing. When I hear the government say we're not investing in these projects, that is absolute nonsense, because the money that we should have been getting up front, Exxon is taking it and reinvesting it into these projects. I don't want anybody to invest my money for me when I could get it up front and spend it, invest it in education and those things that are necessary for my country. They're taking it, investing in oil. What happens? Tell me something. What happens if oil prices start diving? So when I hear the government says, well, we're going to get more money on the back end, that is absolute nonsense. Because on the other side of his mouth, he says, well, I don't know what oil prices is going to be, so I can't give teachers raises. Nobody can predict what oil prices is going to be. Give me my money up front, which is to put ring fencing, and let me, as the government, decide how I spend that money as an investment to my people. So those are the issues that I think if I had anything to do with it, and I've been talking about this forever. As a matter of fact, I even submitted in 2015, I submitted a recommendation to the government that was not You know, it wasn't used, obviously. But even the contract, even this PSA, one of the biggest problem for us, we have no capacity to manage a PSA. It should have been a simple concession type contract, whereas you, and for every barrel of every 100 barrels of oil you produce, we take whatever number, call a number, 30 or 40 barrels. So all this auditing and all this kind of stuff would go away. I don't have to be monitoring how much money you're paying, the cost style, and all this kinds of stuff. So those things have to change in the contract. The other thing that a lot of people do not even realize, we say that cost style is limited to 75%. That is not so. We do not know what it costs us every month to produce. That's 75%. It's an arbitrary number that was put there so that we can get our 12.5%. We do not know if it's costing us 90%. So guess what happens? If it's 90%, for example, if it's 90%, that 15% every month gets carried over into the next month. So we would never be able to get out of getting our full share, because none of these projects in total, when you put it as a total without ring fencing, we will never be able, probably throughout the entire life of producing oil, to get to the point where all of the cost and operation will be paid out. And then we got a billboard that is totally false to say that we're getting 52.5%. We're getting 14.5 and 1/2%. They're getting 85.5%, which is totally ridiculous and egregious. That's what we got to correct. And if we do not do that in the contract fundamentally, that contract will live forever, and we're gonna have to live with it, which is grossly unfair. Exxon knows it.
Dr. Bisram, before you get to Professor, just give me 1 minute, please. And Professor, I apologize.
No, you don't have to.
I absolutely concede to I defer to your knowledge about the Stabroek block, where the oil is, and I agree with that. And renegotiation, I yield to your points there. I would like to add to the volatility of oil prices. It's volatile. We know that. All it needs is a little flare up in the Middle East, or a problem somewhere, or a ruptured pipeline, and we have got a problem. The prices go either way. Now, adding to when I throw in that IEA prediction, leaving out volatility, normal volatility, choppiness of oil prices, when you have got 8 million excess oversupply barrels a day, that is going in and will have into the pool, and that will have a major impact, downward pressure on oil prices. So instead of $80 a barrel, we could be talking 60, we could be talking 50, and God forbid whatever else south of that. So the expectations about be patient now, and more revenue in a few years, nobody says whether it's 3 or 5 or 10. It could be just another mirage and just talking for the sake of talk. We don't know what it is going to be by itself. And when you throw in that the oversupply of 8 million barrels a day, there's a double whammy steering it. Plus, we don't know what alternative fuel technology will be. Renewables, we don't know how advanced that will be, or what any new discovery. So there are all these variables and these unknowns that can cause us to use the president's word, and a far deeper and wronger end of the stick.
Let me make one caution here. This whole thing about predicting what the demand on oil is going to be, trust me, I would never do that again. I was one of those. I remember a conference, I think it was in 2008 or sometime, a conference in Puerto Rico, that I stood up there based on all the information we had and said that we will have peak oil in 2015. And I've got egg on my face, and a lot of folks, a lot of exports are like myself. So to predict what's going to happen with oil, and there's certain countries, OPEC and those countries control what happens in oil. And here's what happens normally when even with renewables, every time renewables start competing with the price of oil, guess what happens? It drops, right? The OPEC and whoever's in the country, they drop the price of oil, put a lot of the small producers in Texas and those places out of business, and then when they put them out of business, they up the price of oil. Unless we can get renewable prices, costs way down, it's not going to be competitive. And the other thing, the United States, of course, the United States is the biggest producer of oil in the world now. And it was because of technology, etc., with hydraulic fracturing. It will be a game changer. Let's say Donald Trump gets elected into office. Renewables would be off the table. We would go on back, pump as much as you can from anywhere that you can. So those are the kinds of things. And that's why I get back, GHK. That's why I want my money up front. You are not going to take my money and Exxon, you're deciding you're going to invest in my money, and you're taking 85% of the profit of the, whatever is generated, and I'm only getting 14%. I want my money up front to invest. But you're absolutely correct. I caution everybody, do not plan on the projection. These projections about oil is going to be gone. We've been saying that for decades now. Oil is still around, and it will stay around for a very, very long time. Trust me.
And don't forget, we got 300 barrels in Venezuela, 300 billion barrels in
that's
Venezuela
the other thing.
that are hanging around.
That is the other thing. 300.
Good.
Venezuela has, that's the other situation that we better look at in terms of national security. Venezuela has 301 to be exact, billion barrels of oil in reserve. We have, right now, we have 11, and that's another question, but it's questionable. So again, the father of all transactionalists, Mr. Donald Trump, if Mr. Trump gets into office again, who do you think? And then, of course, he likes Mr. Putin and wants to form a relationship with Mr. Putin. Mr. Putin got his warships right now. I read that they just landed in Venezuela. So again, all this dynamic here can change, because of oil. So we've got to be careful in terms of when we read these projections about oil is going to be gone in a little while. I've gotten bitten with that. So I just want to caution folks not to put your eggs in that basket.
Thank you. So, Paul, we just got 2 minutes. If you could wrap up.
Okay. I just want to say I'm a friend at the IMF. He's a senior researcher, and they're working on the Global Uncertainty Index. The only thing we are certain about is uncertainty. Anyhow, the other quick point I want to make is, in the 80s, I used to tell Dr. Jagan while we were trying to unite the opposition, I said we have three problematics: the ethnic, the ideological, and the geopolitical. They are still with us, but I want to add another one, the ethic. Unless we could have leaders who are ethical, moral, and spiritual, Guyana will never change. That's number one. Number two, that young population you speak about, under 60 years, under 50, under 30, and so forth, they're not going to be in Guyana. They are migrating. You're talking about Brazilians and Venezuelans coming into Guyana, Nigerians and other people. They're not going to be there because there are already signals of that. I would like to see in the Constitution of Guyana, it's inserted that anybody who holds public office cannot make a private gain. And anybody who violates that should go to jail for a very long time. The reason why we have all these infrastructure projects is because contractors make money and people are getting bribed. Everybody knows that in Guyana. That is not me saying it. It's known. So that's not going to stop. If some leader don't appear in that country, in the 1964 elections, Peter de Geer had a plan called Highway to Happiness. You got to build a road here, there, and all about the place. And Dr. Jagan at Wim Village said, Are we going to eat roads? Are we going to eat roads? I think if he's listening to me now, he would repeat, are we going to eat roads? Are we going to eat hotel? So my brothers and my sisters, this leadership that was elected in these 4 political parties, and don't leave the ANU out, they're in parliament, they're there, they're patriots, they came out, they took a position when many people are afraid to get into public life and all that. So we have 4 political parties. Let us pressure the leaders of those parties. As JHK pointed out, conflict of interest. You can't serve God and the devil at the same time. So the thing is, how are we going to get a leadership like that? It has to come from below. You have to mobilize and organize the people from below to put pressure on the people on top. It's the only way we know. And I want to say one last thing. The reason why Chavez came to power is because the Christian Democratic Party and the Social Democratic Party had exhausted themselves based on corruption. Chavez's campaign was anti-corruption. When he attempted to overthrow the government, and afterwards when he came out of jail after a year and under Rafael Caldera, and he went into election. So I am saying that Guyana will not miss what's happening in Africa, what's happening in Venezuela, and what happening in unless these political parties understand that they have to have leadership that is ethical. Look, I used to go to Venezuela regularly because I was in the leadership of Latin American labor movement, and so we had a Latin American Workers University in Venezuela. So I go there regularly. So one day I'm going through while Carlos Andres Perez was in power in the taxi, and I'm reading the newspaper that Venezuela was making millions of dollars in income, but all the Swiss banks have been offering them a credit, and they've been borrowing money. Why should we be borrowing money that we have to pay back millions of dollars when we have a lot of income from the oil? And you see what happened in Venezuela. It was a collapse. And Carlos Andres Perez was charged for corruption and removed from office. Do you know what a taxi driver told me during the election? I said, Carlos Andres Perez was coming back the second time. And I asked the taxi driver, I said, who are you going to vote for? He said, I'm going to vote for Carlos Andres Perez. I said, well, how are you going to vote for him when the first time he was in office, he was accused of corruption? He said, he made enough money the last time, so this time he will not steal. And he got charged for corruption, and he got removed. And they laid the basis for the rise of the Chavez government. The same thing will happen to Ghana. The same thing will happen there. When I tell people, I say, oh, our military don't have a tradition of coup. I say, our military have a tradition of coup. When that country collapses, somebody got to keep law and order. It happens all over Africa. It happened in Grenada. It happened in Suriname.
Careful. We're getting in dangerous territory here.
But I'm just telling you what's going on.
But let me say quickly.
Our leadership have to be smart and avoid the pitfalls of other nations. That's what I'm saying. That's all.
So quickly,
let that be the final word, Paul. We gotta go.
Just a few seconds. I just want to reinforce something that Paul said there about ethics. And the one thing that I cherished when I worked for the U.S. government, every single employee, you had to have a mandatory ethics training once per year. And it was mandatory. And you better comply because it's serious stuff. And that's the kind we need to have the will and discipline in our new leadership to do that. And that is why, by the way, I said, after education as the #1 criteria for attracting, for developing a country, that is why the #2 is, guess what? Following the rule of law. If you follow the rule of law, all of this corruption and everything else would be either diminished or go away. So that is why it's so important to follow the rule of law.
If we have no ethics, we have no essence.
Yeah.
My last word is
democracy and free and fair election flourish. Gentlemen, let's leave it at that. We'll meet again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.